disorganized manager here. So the disorganized manager is really kind of an interesting critter, right? When we start dealing with this, because we've got managers that will forget details, and will do this, right? And it's mostly just because I'm probably multitasking and I've got way too many things going on. Sort of like I was in a meeting today and we were talking about a new format that we're rolling out for a class, and we're trying something really kind of innovative and really kind of cool, and we're all multitasking in the meeting because we launched today, right? So we'll forget details. We may lose some documents. We may miss a meeting. We may not be in a meeting all the way there, right? Now, this can kind of cause some extra load, extra work for other team members, and it can kind of set a poor standard for the department, and I get it. But disorganization is going to happen, so it's one of those things that you kind of learn to adjust. At least the good part about it is that these are often relatively easy kind of managers to deal with, right? Now, the problem with disorganization is that you kind of sometimes feel like you're working in a vacuum, right? You don't get responses to your emails. You may not get your one-on-ones. They may cancel your one-on-ones. I actually had one manager that was so disorganized. They actually canceled their ones-on-ones for like 6 months, which is really cool. But then at the end of 6 months, we have 6 months to catch up on. And that can be really problematic because now they don't know what I'm doing and it's eval time. So they don't know what I'm doing. That's bad. Right, so you get one set of orders today, you get some tomorrow, you get that multi-challenging kind of aspects of multitasking. It can get to be really interesting. And you end up kind of running around in circles at times, kind of feel like a hamster on a wheel. And that can cause some delays or missed deadlines, and that's a whole other set of issues. The minute you miss a deadline, there's a whole other set of issues that goes along with it, right? But this really, in a lot of ways, is a really easy kind of bad boss style to deal with, right? And again, I'm just going to be real honest on this one. They tend to not escalate, right? They understand that part of the problem is them, so they get this. Now, they're really going to get tired of hearing, but we talked about this last week because they do not remember anything you ever talked about ever. So again, documentation is going to be key here. And this is where your ability to organize becomes key. Now, you've heard me talk about that. I do a task list and I do outlines and I have very open about what I'm working on. Main reason why is that it may not be disorganized, but they may be like super busy. And because I need to keep track of everything I'm doing, because I'm a contractor, I get paid by what I do and how many hours I put in. That task list and documentation makes sure that I can do all of the documentation I need to do at the end of the week, because now I know everything I've worked on. And it makes it really easy, right, to kind of go through this. Again, the only time that this kind of bad boss style actually comes along is if I chose to do something I probably shouldn't have done, or I'm working on a project that I shouldn't be working on, or something else, then that becomes a little bit more problematic. But the thing is, and this is the thing you need to really remember about these kinds of bosses, is that they're the boss. And they wouldn't be the boss. They wouldn't have gotten promoted. They would not be put into this if they weren't at least somewhat successful at what they do. Right? Now, again, we don't test for managerial ability when we bring in a new boss. But the fact is that they made it through an interview process and they're already there. Right? They're there in that point. The other thing too is that there's a bunch of different kinds of organizational styles, and there are a ton of different kinds of organizational styles. So a lot like a messy desk, it may not match your style. So make sure that this isn't a style difference, right? Because if it's a style difference, then you're just going to go and do whatever you want to go do. You can have your own style and mesh that with your bosses, right? But you don't touch anything that's on the desk. Everybody that has a messy desk knows where everything is exactly on that desk and where to find it. Right? So you want to make sure you're not getting in the way because you need a different organizational structure for projects. Make it yourself. You can organize your own work your own way, unless you're working for a micromanager. So this one's actually pretty easy from that viewpoint because you really do have some freedom. There are some really good solutions here that can benefit everyone. And it's mostly by managing upwards. Again, just setting that good example. You, as we do with kids, we model the behavior that we want to see. And it's really kind of funny because it works with adults. You know, again, we think about it when we're raising kids, but actually, believe it or not, a lot of the parenting techniques like managing up, centering, emotional regulation, all that kind of stuff actually really works in management. You just can't look like you're trying to play mom and dad, right? So one of the first things you really want to do right from the start is lots of communication. Now, I actually had a boss that was kind of like this because he was a people pleaser, right? And I actually at one point had to write down what our roles and responsibilities were. Right? Because he's the boss. He's supposed to be thinking strategic stuff. Leave the day-to-day stuff to me. Right? So we had a little bit of micromanagement going in there. We had a lot of miscommunication going in there. And he really wanted to run everything but he didn't want to take ownership of everything. So there were some other underlying things that are going on there. So we actually really needed to establish a communications process. And then we needed to discuss some expectations because there was a whole kitten of things that were going on in here. We had some micromanagement. We had some problems not being able to tell the truth. We had some problems with disorganization. We had some other problems going on here, so that we really understood what those expectations around that job were. And I actually had to write that document. It's a beautiful 4-page document that lists out all of our roles and responsibilities, right? But I had to do it because he was just not going to work the way it was going to work, right? And the organization was a big part of it. Now, we worked together to create a communication space. We used OneNote, and I did all my documentation within OneNote. So that actually really helped promote productivity, because if he ever wondered what I was doing, which was often, because I'm actually, when I'm working, I'm really just working. I'm not really communicative. He could go to OneNote and find out, okay, this is what Dan's doing, and either let me know that I need to work on something else, or, okay, this is fine. He's doing what he's doing and everything will be cool. So again, that documentation, and again, documentation is key for everything you ever have to deal with in a business environment, is always going to be documentation, right? It keeps everything on radar. It keeps everything I'm working on. Everything's open. They can keep track of small items that might be overlooked, especially if you have a project that delays. Now, some of my projects were delayed upwards of almost 2 years as we kind of moved through some of the organizational structures, which caused a lot of problems trying to keep track of a project that would go live, die, kick off, go die. And you're kind of keeping up with that. And that can cause a lot of chaos in the day-to-day work. And the documentation can really help organize all those dates, relationships, and everything else that's going on with those projects, especially if they're kind of jumping and not really moving. They're just kind of kicking and then not going anywhere because we can't find people to work on the projects, right? So kind of make my outlines. Anyone can read them. It's all wide open. And my boss is happy. And that really does honestly help with the organization. You use your organizational style to kind of guide them to a much better organizational, or your organizational style. Of course, my organizational style is the best, right? Of course. But again, it gave him a chance to kind of take a look at this and figure all this stuff out. And it can really simplify the organizational process. You know, a team uses technological business tools. We used OneNote, we used Teams, we used Outlook, we used Smart Sheets. We used a lot of really cool technology to make sure we were sharing information up and down the entire organizational structure. Now, you can have difficulty collaborating with your boss if your technology isn't good enough, right? So Teams, really good, but it ties to SharePoint, and everybody hated SharePoint where I worked, but we still used it. So things would get buried in Teams, literally gigabits of data in Teams. Some of it was needed, some of it was just background, but it was really hard to work out how you were going to do that. So you'd end up in being parts of millions of team groups, and you didn't know what they were for. People would just assign you to team groups. So that difficulty collaborating around using teams and team groups, we needed a different solution. Right? We just didn't have the time to go figure out what we really needed. Yeah, but don't be afraid to ask for what you need. I know some of us actually went over, we moved to Slack. We started doing our own Slack channels, right? We always had a sideband communication off the official channels. We also knew that the official channels were heavily monitored, so we needed a cleaner side channel where we didn't have to worry about our records being captured or talked about, because on the side channel, we would be in a meeting talking about what's going on in the meeting. You don't want to have that interruption or disruption in Teams in a meeting and all of a sudden have it pinging while your people are talking. You can be over on Slack, or you can be on chat or something else doing this. So don't be afraid to ask for what you need, especially if it's something that will save time or money or effort. Company will like that. But again, organizational comes along with it, because now you've got to accept failure. Now, there's no science to managing upward. Your boss may be open to the idea. They may not be open to the idea. They may be hostile to the idea of you telling them how to do their job, right? And again, try to keep it as clean as you can. Try to guide and nudge, right? They're still people, and they've got their pride. But there's nothing wrong with getting a little messy in art. I've never seen an artist that's clean, right? Doesn't have paint on their hands or whatever. So don't let misunderstandings or challenges or even just their bad day, because they're going to have bad days. Oh boy, will your boss have bad days. And it just makes everybody really super happy to be at work. Don't get that in the way. Don't let that happen. Don't let that get in the way of your organization or your communication. You got to keep on doing what you're going to do, because failure is part of this, right? Failure is a big part of self-development. And again, if you work in an organization that is blessed enough to fail fast, fail often, and use it as a learning lesson rather than as punitive, man, you can learn some really cool ways about being flexible and nimble and calm when the whole world is burning around you because you didn't do a product launch right. It really turns into a really interesting ability to grow your skills. So the ability to accept failure, including organization, can really help out because you learn from these things, right? And learning is a big part of it. And for me, these are really easy managers because they're not evil, right? They're not intentionally doing anything. This is who they are and this is how they are. It's an act of omission more than an act of commission, right? If the work's not helping you, then sure, you can go where you want to go, you can quit. But with this kind of manager, oh wow, you got the luxury as much time as you need, right? They're not going to get in your way. They're not going to be screaming. They're not going to be yelling. They rarely ever escalate unless there is something else going on, right? But if it's just straight old disorganization, these guys are easy managers to work up. If they are wrapped up with some other management style, the situation becomes more complex, and this is just a symptom. But again, you've got the luxury of time with these kind of managers. So if you have a disorganized manager and you can at least choose some kind of organizational style for yourself, man, I would just stick around, honestly. Unless there's something else going on, unless something else happens, you're aware of it. You've got your documentation. You've got all your ducks in a row. You've made some kind of peace with your boss on how data is going to be presented. And once you've got that, easy peasy. Okay, that's it for this kind of manager. I will see you in the next lecture.